Because of the way Slate's been split up so far this year, we haven't had a lot of chances to do split slate podcasts here on the show. But today we have 3 games on the early only slate, 3 games in the main slate, and I think both slates are honestly pretty okay. So we're going to break down both of those to get you ready for all 6 games across today in MLB DFS. Welcome on into the solo shot. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire, here to break down both the early only and the main slates over on FanDuel for today. We'll do the main slate first, just in case you are listening here after 12:35 p.m. Don't want to drudge through that and skip ahead. So we'll do the main slate first. Early slate locks at 12:35. So we'll do that second in the show here. If you want to skip ahead to the early only slate, it's early on. You want to get close in there before lock. The timestamp for when that begins will be in the episode description, whether it be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever it may be, you can find it there. So early or main slate first, early only later on. To get that timestamp, check out the episode description. We'll start things off with the main slate here in just 1 second. But first, a reminder to make sure you're subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts. We are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, you name it, you can find us there. And while you're there, if you like what you hear, leave us a 5-star rating as well. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and you can get in on the action right from first tip with FanDuel. Right now, all customers can get a no-sweat same-game parlay every weekend when you bet the NBA playoffs. That's right. Just place a 3+ leg, same-leg parlay, or same-game parlay, or same-game parlay plus on any NBA playoff game. You'll get bonus bets back if you don't win. There's no better place to bet all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Head to the FanDuel app and get a no-sweat same-game parlay every weekend of the NBA playoffs. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star Casino LLC. Bonus issues non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG. A Massachusetts Hope is here. Gambling helpline ma.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support. In New York, 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. In Arizona, 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text next step to 53342. In Connecticut, 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat. In Indiana, 1-800-9-WITH-IT. In Wyoming and Kansas, 1-800-522-4700. Or in Kansas, ksgamblinghelp.com. Louisiana is 1-877-770-STOP. In Maryland, mdgamblinghelp.org. And in West Virginia, go to 1-800-GAMBLER.net. Let's kick things off here with the main slate. It is a 3-game slate with lock set for 7:05 p.m. Eastern for today, and no weather notes on this slate. Would note that temperature is pretty different across all 3 games for this for the main slate. We've got a temperature in the 60s out in Oakland. We have got temperatures in 86 in Phoenix. So would keep that in mind. Downgrade Oakland for sure, but we're still going to want to be there for stacking. We'll talk about that later on. Pitchers on this main slate. Nathan Eovaldi is the highest salary guy coming in at $11,000, followed by Drew Rasmussen at 10-3, Alex Cobb 87, and Domingo Germán is $8,000. Now, Eovaldi is in that game with the reduced temperature. That is bad for offense, good for pitching. Nathan Eovaldi is a guy I've wanted to use a couple times so far this year, but just couldn't quite pull the trigger. But now, facing the A's, I think that gives us the green light to go to Eovaldi as our top guy here. It is a great matchup, as you know, because the A's have a 25% strikeout rate against righties on their current active roster this year. That's a boost for Eovaldi. Eovaldi has not been a crazy high strikeout guy this year, but he's also not been lagging in that department. He upped his splitter usage in his second start, and in the past 6 starts with more splitters, he has a 25% strikeout rate. It comes with a 3.33 skill interactive ERA and a 3% walk rate. His batted ball data is decent too. So honestly, across the board, Eovaldi has been solid this year. I have him projected for 6.7 strikeouts tonight. That is, even on a decent slate for pitching, honestly, it is still the most of the night. So I will take that and lock him in. To me, Nathan Eovaldi deserves to be high salaried at 11,000, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I will be okay riding with him there as the top pitcher. I think the second slot comes down to Drew Rasmussen and Domingo Germán. Alex Cobb is fun, but doesn't get as many strikeouts. Now, between Rasmussen and Germán, if you want to get to a high salaried stack and you want to go Germán for the salary savings at $8,000, I would not blame you. I think that makes a lot of sense. Totally on board. Personally, given the breakdown of this slate, I think I'll be okay going with Rasmussen, getting to his salary at 10-3. So Rasmussen does have the edge for me. And a lot of that's because of matchup. Germán is facing the Rays, a 140 WRC plus against righties, a 239 ISO. The Yankees, who will face Rasmussen, even with Aaron Judge being back, still at a 95 WRC plus and a 153 ISO. There's just not a lot of depth in that lineup right now. Rasmussen can also suppress power because across 7 starts, he has a 28% hard hit rate allowed, which is a 28% fly ball rate. Combine that with the good plate discipline numbers, and Rasmussen has a 3.11 ERA. He did just face the Yankees last week, which means they're familiar with his stuff, and I hate that. But in that one, Rasmussen was good. 5 2/3 innings, just 2 hits allowed. He had 6 strikeouts, only 3 hard hit balls on 13 balls in play. That was pre-Judge return, but still, he did do pretty well there. I do have Germán projected for more strikeouts. He's at 6.3, whereas Rasmussen is at 5.9. So again, full leeway to go Germán if you want, but I want to lean Rasmussen due to the matchup difference between these two guys. So Eovaldi 1, Rasmussen 2, but if you want to go Germán above him, totally fine. I would understand that as well. As far as stacking goes, I still don't know who the A's will be starting for today. I don't know if they know. It will not be Mason Miller because of his elbow injury. Ken Waldichuk got pushed back to tomorrow. They said it will be a starter, but they have not said who that starter will be. I'm just not sure it matters. I think we're going to want to stack the Rangers against them no matter what. And most of that reasoning is not because of the starters, who it could be. It's the reason we've been discussing. That's the bullpen. The A's active roster has a 4.84 ERA in the bullpen, but even that might be overselling them a bit because their skill interactive ERA is 5.26. That is the worst in the league. Only 2 teams are worse than 5.00 there, and only 7 teams are worse than 4.00. So the A's are a full 1.26 runs worse than 23 other teams in terms of skill interactive ERA in their bullpen. They're an outlier, and it's boosting opposing teams. It means we can get points against them deep into the game for DFS. And that's not always the case. A lot of times, most of the scoring comes in the first 5 innings. So the starter is going to be a guy not currently in the rotation. He'll be followed by this bullpen. And I think that when you combine those two things together, no matter what, the Rangers, even in colder weather, are going to be the top stack of this main slate. So the Rangers, to me, I don't really care who the starter is. I'd downgrade them if Miller miraculously can go, but I don't think he will. But either way, they're going to be our top stack for the main slate. Whether the starter is a righty or a lefty, I am super intrigued by Ezekiel Duran. He hit second against a righty a couple nights ago because someone else is sitting. But I think it's also an indication of the fact that he's been pretty good, and I think they're acknowledging that. He's probably going to bat 7th tonight if I had to guess, but nudging his way forward. He has a 162 ISO against righties. He has a 51% hard hit rate overall this year, and he's willing to swipe bags. So whether it's a righty or lefty, I think Duran is in play, and a guy I am very willing to include in my Rangers stack. So Ezekiel Duran, someone I'll be looking at for tonight. His salary on FanDuel is exactly $3,000. The second stack behind the Rangers will be the Giants facing Tommy Henry. Henry not able to find his groove as of yet, which allows us, I think, to stack the Giants against him. Across 3 starts, Henry has a 6.29 skill interactive ERA. That number is high mostly because of his super low strikeout rate. The batted ball data is not bad. He has a 32% hard hit rate allowed, but he lets up a lot of fly balls. And in order to get by with a low strikeout rate and a high fly ball rate, you need to be an outlier in how much hard contact you allow in order to not implode. He may keep that number low, but last year in 9 starts, Henry let up a 39% hard hit rate. So I'm not sold yet he'll be able to keep up the low hard contact rate he has allowed thus far. even with the minimal hard contact, he still has allowed a 5.17 ERA this year. The Giants have some guys who hit lefties really well, so I think we should ride with them here, especially with the park factor boost they get in Arizona. So Rangers won despite the bad weather. I think that the Giants are 2, and they get the benefit of getting exposure to the best weather on tonight's slate. Mitch Haniger is kind of off to a slow start for the Giants, 283 WOBA for him, but underlying numbers are a lot better. His hard hit rate is 53%, and that is translated to some power. He's just striking out a bit too much, but that's not as much of a concern against Henry as it would be with others. So I think Haniger is a guy I want to be high on the main slate. Speaking of Haniger, let's talk about some dinger picks because I actually remember to do dinger picks. Typically, I forget. We do the Split Slate podcast, but dinger picks for the main slate, fun one or boring one, Mitch Haniger. I think he's probably pretty boring by now, given that he's been a solid player for a long enough time. Mitch Haniger facing a lefty. I think the underlying batted ball data is fine. So we'll go Haniger for the boring one. For the fun one, let's go Jonah Heim. I don't know if I've ever had Heim as a dinger pick on the show before, and maybe he doesn't qualify as like the fun one anymore because he's been so good this year, but his expected WOBA is 409. So that's pretty sick. So maybe I should flip-flop these two, given how well Heim has done this year, but we'll go Mitch Haniger and Jonah Heim as the dinger calls, regardless of which category they fall into. That is going to wrap up the main slate discussion. So if you're listening to this after 12:35 p.m. Eastern, we'll see you tomorrow. Tom Vecchio filling in for me tomorrow on the solo shot. He'll talk to you then. But if you want to play the early only slate, let's dig into that now. It is a 3-game slate with lock set for 12:35 p.m. Eastern. This one does have some weather on it, specifically in Kansas City for the Royals and White Sox. This one looks a little bit at risk of getting banged because there are thunderstorms throughout the day in Kansas City. I think there's a legit risk this game does not play. We'll talk about contingency plans for that in the stacking section later on. Pitchers on this slate, only 3 guys with salaries above $8,000. Those guys, Yu Darvish at 99, Kodai Senga at 96, and Bailey Ober at $9,000. Yu Darvish is a guy I've always adored, so we get him on a decently thin slate. I think it's pretty easy to make him as the top guy on the early only slate. And I view Darvish on this slate as being in a tier of his own. He's facing the Twins, who are healthy right now, but the offense is still struggling. They have a 94 WRC plus against righties with a 24% strikeout rate. They are hitting for some power, but you can have big outings against this team. Darvish has looked good so far. He did struggle with control in his first start this year, walked a couple too many guys. In his second start, he started to scale back on the usage of his four-seam fastball, and that tweak for him has worked out pretty well. In the past 5 starts with fewer four-seamers, Darvish's strikeout rate is 29%, which is easily the best number on the slate. He has a 3.46 skill interactive ERA. I have Darvish projected for 7.5 strikeouts. Nobody else in the early only slate is projected for more than 5.95. So I think you can use Darvish here and figure out the rest in there. So to me, I'm just going to commit to you, Darvish, and make him my top play of the early only slate. 2 options for the second spot are Kodai Senga and Bailey Ober. Ober is at home, but he's facing the Padres in that Darvish matchup, whereas Senga is on the road. He gets the Reds. I'm going to go with the easier matchup here and go Senga, but Ober is at least in consideration for this slot. It is a good matchup for Senga. He has a 93. The Reds, have a 93 WRC plus against righties with a 125 ISO. So from that perspective, they're a good matchup. The downside here is the Reds will draw walks, and Senga has struggled a lot with those. Across 6 starts, he has let up a 16% walk rate. That has not bothered him yet because he has a 3.38 ERA, but it has the potential to bother him. I'm guessing that he's getting by because Senga gets strikeouts and ground balls. That can generate double plays, can strand runners with a high strikeout rate. I think that that's probably helping. Strikeout rate 26%, ground ball rate 54%. So I'm guessing that's how he's getting around. That might not always work out that way, but it's not totally fluky that he's gotten by. I have Senga projected for 5.95 strikeouts. Ober is at 5.55, so 0.4 strikeouts between these two guys. It's a small gap, but I'm fine going Senga as my number 2 option on the early only slate. I think the top 3 guys are the 3 guys you'd want to build around in terms of pitchers for the early only slate. As far as stacks go here, Ben Lively is about to join the Reds rotation. I say rotation, but that's kind of a misnomer because he is not actually starting for today, coming in behind an opener. But Ben Lively expected to be the bulk reliever for today for the Reds, and I think we can stack against him with the Mets. Lively threw 27 innings in AAA before being promoted, and down there, his ERA was great. It was 2.33. The peripherals for Lively were not as glowing, though. His xFIP was 5.67. It was mostly there due to a 15% strikeout rate, but also he let up a 41% fly ball rate. Lively was better in AAA last year, but he wasn't dominant then either. I think the Mets should be able to get to him. So Derek Law will start. I assume Ben Lively will follow. And I think that combination with the Reds bullpen is one we can stack against for tonight. Kind of seems like Brett Beatty is starting to hit his stride. I had talked 2 weeks ago, doing a check-in on Beatty about not quite there yet, wasn't sold on what he'd been doing so far. I'm okay changing my tune now. I'm sold. His expected WOBA is up to 365. His hard hit rate is 53%. He's batting the middle of the order. It hasn't led to huge results yet, which has kept his salary reasonable at $2,800, but that's even better for us. So Brett Beatty, I was not on board before. I am now. Think it makes a lot of sense to build around him here at $2,800 within our Mets stacks. Now, we talked about the 3 pitchers I liked. We talked about one of the stacks. And the thing we have not discussed yet is that weather game with the White Sox and Royals. So by process of elimination, one of those 2 teams will be our final stack. Again, there is risk here with the rain. If the rain threat is too high, or if they postpone earlier on, I'd stack the Padres next against Bailey Ober. Does let up a lot of hard contacts. They'd be a fine stack for sure. But if we get the green light to stack this game, I would actually lean towards the Royals here versus the White Sox. The Royals are facing Mike Clevenger, who has 15 strikeouts in his past 2 starts, so he's pitching a lot better now than he was earlier on this year. But he's still letting up a lot of dangerous contact. He let up 2 barrels in the Rays game, the first game in that sample, let up a 57% hard hit rate in that one as well. He was better against the Reds, but almost no ground balls there. So I still don't think that Clevenger is back to being a pitcher we need to fear in DFS. Even with the strikeouts that he got in those 2 games specifically, Clevenger let up 6 earned runs in those with 3 home runs allowed. For the season, his ERA is now 4.84 with a 4.88 skill interactive ERA. The Royals offense got off to a terrible start this year, but they've been a lot better the past week or so, partly aided by a series with that A's bullpen. But I think they're getting better to the extent where we can feel good about them here and rank the Royals as our number 2 stack again, weather permitting, just a hair ahead of the White Sox. I think the White Sox are very much in the same tier as the Royals for tonight. I think it's worth touching on Edward Olivares. I tend to view him as being like a lefty basher for some reason, but even against righties this year, he has a 186 ISO with 3 stolen bases. So enough power and the ability and willingness to swipe a bag. Doesn't strike out a ton, which is good against Clevenger. So I think that Olivares' appeal is starting to expand, where it's not just against lefties, but also we can go here at times against righties too. And I think this is a good spot for it. He's $2,800. He's shown some upside. So Edward Olivares is a guy I am okay with against a righty on today's slate. Dinger calls for the early only slate. Yeah, 4 dinger calls for today. We'll see how many we can hit. We'll see. Dinger call is always a risk. But for the boring one, it's Pete Alonso. It's Pete Alonso in a spot against a Reds pitcher who lets up a lot of fly balls. I think that we just go Pete Alonso there and log out. For the fun one, I'll go NJ Melendez in that Royals versus White Sox game. Too many strikeouts for me to feel like great about him for DFS. But as far as like hitting a home run, he has been smacking the ball. Super high barrel rate both last year and this year. Barrel rate 14.6% this year with a 57% hard hit rate. If it weren't for the strikeouts, I would be all over him against Clevenger and still will be there because I like power. But we'll go with him and Alonso as the dinger picks for the early only slate. That is all that we have here for today on the podcast. Mentioned this before, but I will not be here tomorrow or Monday. My wife is having her PhD graduation, so I'll be out there at that. So Tom Vecchio filling in for me tomorrow, Austin Swain filling in for me on Monday. So no video version of those two podcasts. They will still be up over on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed, though. So thank you to Tom and Austin for filling in for me, and thank you to you for subscribing to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed to get those shows right as they go live. If you've got any questions for me, I am on Twitter at Jim Sannes, JimSannes. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Want to thank you all for tuning in for today. Good luck to you with your MLB DFS lines for both the early only and the main slates, and we'll talk to you once again Tuesday when I am back. This has been the Solo Shot right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.